Hello, Ed.
Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Governor.
Hello, Jeff. Hello, Ed. Nice to be with you.
Ed Lyons, we are privileged today to have with us on the Lincoln Review podcast a man who needs no introduction. So I've debated whether we should give him one or not. With us
We
today,
should say which governor it is first.
yes, Governor Michael Dukakis. Welcome to the Lincoln Review podcast.
Good to be here. If they're under 30, they have no idea who I am. So
Well, that's
you can give me whatever introduction you want to.
I'll tell my kids when I get home, like, no, it's not for Colo, it's not Sergeant, it's
Right.
Governor Dukakis.
Governor Dukakis. Let's briefly go over the governor's resume. Technically, 2 or 3 terms. I guess, Ed, fill us in on the terms the governor served for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Well, he's actually an enlightened citizen who's been more than his time in politics, but if we're going to do that, he was governor from 74 to 78. He was lieutenant governor before then. He lost the primary to a man named King and was out of office for 4 years. Then he came back and then was governor from 83 to 91. He ran for president unsuccessfully. After that, he was on the OA State and Transportation. He was on the Amtrak Board of Governors for a while, and he has been remarkably involved in a million things since then, and is quite vital here at the age of 83. So it's pretty impressive.
And, important note, he has been on the stage with a personal hero of mine during the Democratic presidential primary debates, Mr. William F. Buckley Jr., which I was. I was watching that on YouTube the other day, and
I had an interesting exchange with Bill Buckley during that debate.
Well, let's put a pin in that. Maybe we'll save that for the potpourri at the end, because what I'd like to get started on, we're here to talk 2 things today, Governor and Ed. We're talking about transportation, and then we're going to get a feel for the state of party politics, both locally and nationally. So, you're on a podcast, a Republican podcast, with a conservative Republican like myself and a moderate squish Republican like Ed over here. I have to say, can you enlighten us to what is it with liberalism and trains, the fascination with it? Because there are many conservatives like myself that would like to know what is
about them?
What is so special about the desire to move trains?
Jeff, it's not just about liberals. When I went on the Amtrak board and Bill Clinton was president, the understanding was that there would be 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans named to that board. And the 3 Republicans were 3 of the best people I've ever worked with. One was Tommy Thompson, who was then the governor of Wisconsin, subsequently became Secretary of Health and Human Services under George W. Bush. One was Linwood Holton, the Republican civil rights governor of Virginia, who desegregated the schools when the segregationist Democrats in Virginia wouldn't do it, who happens to be the father-in-law of Tim Kaine. And the third was a remarkable guy, a pharmacist by profession, named John Robert Smith, who was the 4-term mayor of Meridian, Mississippi. And they were 3 of the best people I've ever worked with. Why? Well, we were all strongly committed to the notion that this country needed a first-class, modern, high-speed national rail passenger system, which seems like a no-brainer to me. And there was absolutely no disagreement among the 6 of us on that. It was one of the best boards I ever served on. I'd like to think we did some good stuff, but this is a country that still doesn't seem to be able to make the same commitment that most advanced and not so advanced industrialized countries in the world are making to high-speed ground transportation. And why that is, I don't know. But in any event, it was one of the best boards I've really worked with, gotten to know, and we all shared this very common commitment. Now, as you know, Bill Weld, the former Republican governor, and I have teamed up on the North-South Rail Link project. Why? Because we think it's essential.
Well, we did a podcast about a year or 2 ago, a year and a half ago, I think, when you first announced it about the North-South Rail Link. But I guess my question is more specifically is why trains? And specifically, I'm thinking, I mean, since you mentioned it, more passenger-related trains. So trains related to that for people, the push for it and the stated need for it.
All you got to do is look around. Look at this city and look at the congestion in this city. And this is not by far the worst city. I spend 3 months teaching at UCLA every year. Try Los Angeles if you want to see gridlock. But at this point in time, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the average speed of automobiles on the Southeast Expressway is 11 miles an hour. Another 3 or 4 years, it's going to be 6 miles an hour. Another 3 or 4 years, it's going to be 3 miles an hour. The automobile simply can't do this job. Now, there are some interesting developments, some of the new taxi services, the possibility of autonomous vehicles and so on. But you still don't have the capacity to handle more automobiles. And if we want to be able to move around the city, not only that, but make it possible for our people to access jobs that aren't next door, we've got to have a first-class regional rail system. It's just as simple as that. And most of the other countries of the world understand this. The United States still seems to be having a difficult time doing so. Fortunately, we don't have to wait for the rest of the country, but you can't look at this really great metropolitan area, in my opinion, and not conclude that it needs a first-class public transportation system, which includes a first-class regional rail system.
Well, I guess the critical question is there a demand for it? Is there a demand for the ridership that would, or we're talking laying down new tracks or adding new trains to the current rail system? And even if we want to expand it beyond Boston, outside the Northeast Corridor, that the Amtrak Acela link from, say, Boston down to D.C., Philly, New York included, they've been pushing that California, L.A. to San Francisco rail for a long time now. I don't know if they've...
It's under construction.
So they're breaking ground on it.
It's under construction.
So for things like that, when you do have congestion, but that doesn't necessarily create demand for rail. Rail is slower, tougher to build, tougher to maintain than, say, an airport, where you'd have more commercial-based airlines flying down from back and forth, the shuttle services down to New York for business people traveling back and forth, or that, and more particularly, we're advancing it technologically. More people are working remotely. More people are dislocated from a centralized office space than, say, the 80s and 90s and prior to that. So from where I sit, the idea of investing in a massive, massive billions of dollar rail structure to support a demand that I would say was probably fractional in nature. I mean, not necessarily a huge demand for centralized population to get to another centralized location. The ridership has what's the stats on the MBTA ridership locally? Is it somewhat flat? It's kicked up and down over the past 10 years, I'd say, when you've seen the explosion of working remotely.
It's gone up, I think. I don't think it's gone down. Governor Dukakis would know this. I think it's overall gone up.
It's increased steadily, certainly since the days when I was governor. And I'd like to think part of that was that we made that system a system that was good to ride, fun to ride, and well managed. Now we got some problems these days.
We'll get into those
with the T. But I don't see how you can look at this metropolitan area and not conclude that if we don't invest, and we don't have to invest a lot. Look, we've got the tracks. We've got the capacity. In fact, one of the great things about public transportation is that it has almost unlimited capacity.
So you're saying, let's get specific. What are you talking about for increasing commuter rail service locally? And if you want to touch on it nationally, more trains, more frequent stops, more runs?
The one major capital investment we need is to connect North and South Station.
Why?
Because that would have a dramatic impact on the effectiveness, the speed, the capacity of the regional rail system. And to tolerate a situation in which, by the way, it's more expensive because we really have two commuter rail systems with a gap of a mile. To tolerate that situation, I think it's just ridiculous.
So you want to close the mile?
Want to close the mile. That's the major capital investment. Other than that, it's a question of putting on good equipment, increasing frequencies, and making it possible for people to use the system in a way that's going to give them much more economic opportunity, much greater access to jobs that are available in this region. And remember, you're right that more and more people may be working remotely. But downtown Boston today is infinitely more active, full of people, full of jobs than it was 30 or 40 years ago when it was practically dying.
I mean, and in terms of that, that's a good point. But so to counter that argument we're having now housing issues of capacity, and Mayor Walsh wants to add about 55,000
Right.
more housing units
Right.
in the city,
Right.
because of the demand for housing in the city. At the same time, I think it's a competing interest to talk about the commuter rail coming into North and South Station. I mean, if you want to close that gap of a mile, it's going to cost many billions of dollars.
No, it isn't. No, it's not going to cost me.
You want to do it underground?
Yeah, it's we know what these things cost because there must be 20 to 25 major cities in the world that have exactly the same problem we have. They have these old 19th century stub end stations, and they're connecting them. And we know what they cost. As a matter of fact, the closest thing to the North-South Rail Link that we've done in this area is the extension of the Red Line from Harvard Square to Alewife. A little longer. It's about a half a mile longer than this would be, but it's as deep. It's 140 feet deep, 3 new stations, and in current dollars, it cost us $1.6 billion
To do that extension.
to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, why is not? And I'm actually genuinely asking the question. Why is not? If you get off at North Station, you're commuting from the north, say, or either say you get off at South Station from the commuter rail. If you want to get downtown, you can take the Green Line or Orange Line that cuts right through that. Yeah, you have to deboard the train.
You got to
and
get
then-
off.
yeah.
You got to get on the Green Line. Maybe you then have to get on the Orange Line. And folks from the north, in particular, where the governor lives,
Yeah.
are particularly anxious. I mean, there's a reason Seth Moulton is a passionate advocate for this. He represents the North Shore, and they come in on the commuter rail and then they stop. By the way, the link would not only make it possible for them to go directly to their jobs, but the seaport has a problem these days. We're developing a seaport, and it's got no effective public transportation
The
access.
seaport's a good question, but
And the North-South Rail Link would provide the seaport with the kind of transportation it needs. So there are many reasons why this simple project, and it's not that complicated, makes all kinds of sense. That's the one major capital investment we need. Other than that, it's a question of maintaining it and a question of making sure that we put on modern equipment which can move people at relatively
so the cost
Good
benefit
speed.
the cost benefit we're talking about is it worth
Huge.
$1.5 billion? I mean, go by your.
It'll
your
be
numbers.
two. It'll
So-
be two and a half.
So $2.5 billion to close that gap, so that the commuters from the North Station don't have to take the Orange
No.
Line.
So that folks from the south
Yeah.
can get places. Now, one of the problems these days is that both North and South Station are becoming more and more congested. South Station is out of capacity. If we do South Coast Rail, and I don't know of an investment that would help southeastern Massachusetts more than getting them trains down there, and it's taken much too long to do that. But if we do that, Amtrak wants to double the frequencies of the Acela every 30 minutes, not every hour. You keep adding that, and it's necessary. This isn't something we're doing because it's fun. South Station's out of capacity. Now, what's the alternative to the North-South Rail Link to deal with this growing congestion at South Station? If you can believe this, Mass DOT is seriously considering, and so is the governor, spending between $1.5 billion and $2 billion to add 7 new tracks to South Station
4 platforms.
and more platforms.
And Ed, the bit of trivia our audience may or may not know about, who is South Station named after?
They renamed it after Governor Dukakis recently. It's now the Michael Dukakis Transportation Center.
Would you like us to refer to it?
It will- as I said at the time, it will always be known as South Station, although I'm very unhappy with the fact that the current management of the T is draping it with beer ads. We spent $30 million when I was governor
Yeah, really.
to take that station, which had pigeons flying around in the eaves and rain coming through the roof, and transform it into what I thought was an extremely handsome, restored train station.
You don't like the ad space, even with the added revenue?
I'm married to a woman in recovery.
Okay.
And we have a mayor of the city of Boston in recovery. And when the T under Governor Patrick began covering itself with liquor ads, I don't know whether you guys remember when Kenmore Station was absolute vodka station. I remember. Kitty and Marty, then a state legislator, went to Deval and said, look, can we get those liquor ads off the T? And to his credit, he said, yeah, and they were gone in 3 months. Current administration wants them back at the same time that it's talking about dealing with addiction. So you're going to have the major public facility encouraging people to drink while we're worried about addiction. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. So I've expressed myself rather forcefully to the governor on this subject, and I hope, so has my dear wife, and I hope that we're going to get that done. But to go back to the transportation issue.
So you don't want to see a South Station, Dukakis Station, expanded. And by the way, that you're probably the only retired politician I know of who is objecting to something named after him getting bigger. I think that's really interesting politically.
Look, here's the point. If we do the north-south rail link, the capacity of the system will be expanded dramatically. Trains will come into South Station, spend 4 minutes discharging passengers and taking them on and going off to Newburyport, Lowell, Fitchburg, Concord, New Hampshire, I hope one of these days, in a way that will dramatically expand the capacity of the system without requiring a lot of additional investment apart from the connection. You certainly won't have to expand South Station. That's totally unnecessary. You won't have to expand North Station, which, by the way, will happen unless we do this. And you will dramatically increase people's access to jobs, to entertainment, to the city, and to the region. So it's that one investment that we need, and if we do it, all of this other stuff could be scrapped. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense at all. I think Seth Moulton...
Well, what about the argument that from, we talk about the communities like Fall River, communities outside of Boston, where they're talking about expanding that rail to or increasing the
just
amount of
extending,
capacity.
taking...
But eventually it pushes all that money back into Boston. I mean, so...
No. If you talk to people in southeastern Massachusetts, they'll tell you that they will benefit enormously from regional rail for a variety of reasons. On the other hand, if we do it, and we should, it's going to add to the pressure on the stations. How do you solve that? By connecting the two stations.
Just because our listeners might not know this, the main reason they want to make South Dukakis Station, I'm going to call it that even if you don't, the main reason they want to make Dukakis Station bigger is because they want to add a lot more trains. They have nowhere to put the trains during the day when they're not running. And what Governor Dukakis said in the Boston Globe story is that if you did the north-south rail link, you could store trains in the tunnels and they weren't being used, and you wouldn't have to build the extra storage space at the station, I think is what you said.
You could do well, first you expand the capacity of the stations, enormously. Secondly, you don't have to use valuable downtown land at Widette Circle, at Beacon Yards, to store trains. You can store trains anywhere in the system if you connect those two stations. It's absolutely crazy to use valuable tax-producing, job-producing land for train storage in and around downtown Boston. And that is totally unnecessary if you connect the two stations.
What are the stats? How much has ridership gone up over, say, past 5 or 10 years?
I can't tell you that. I will say this, that ridership on commuter rail has plateaued because the service is terrible, and it's a disgrace.
So we're saying that officially that's not lack of demand for getting in and using it.
There's enormous demand, and if you connect the two stations, the demand will skyrocket. But you've got to give people good service. I mean, what's happening on commuter rail these days, since we presumably privatized it many years ago, is a disgrace. When I first became governor, the service was terrible. Commuter rail was terrible. It was in private hands. The old railroads, they were terrible. The service was terrible. We acquired the entire system for a song. Jeff. I mean, we paid, I don't know, 50 or 60 million bucks for the whole system,
Wow.
and then we modernized it.
Right.
And I kicked out these railroads, and I brought Amtrak in. Now, there aren't an awful lot of companies in the United States that know how to run a passenger rail system these days. We've got good freight railroads, but they don't know how to run a passenger rail system. They don't want to run a passenger rail system. And Amtrak gave us very good service for, I don't know, 20 years.
But they've lost money for a long time, Amtrak.
Well, every national train system loses money. Amtrak happens to lose much less money. Amtrak is getting closer and closer to paying for itself out of the fare box, which is very, very unusual.
Okay, so I mean, it boils down to some.
I mean,
some
let me just stop you for a
Sure,
second.
go ahead.
Highways run a deficit.
Well, it's a
No,
service
a big deficit.
compared to toll highways.
No,
highways-
I'm talking about
lose money
highways.
in terms of
I mean, what do you think we spend on highways every year in this country?
In the country, I don't know. I think
40,
locally,
$40
I know.
billion a year. They're losing money, right? No, they're a public service, and we provide public funds for highways. I mean, why is I've never understood why we kind of look at trains and transit and say, well, that ought to pay its way, but we're perfectly happy to spend $40 billion a year on highways. I mean, it's a public service, and you do it. Fortunately, we do have a national rail passenger system. It's nowhere near as good as it ought to be, that is very close to paying for itself out of the fare box in terms of operating expenses.
Well, you'd have to look at a couple things. I mean, nationally, if we spend $40 billion a year, how much do gas taxes, other levies on drivers add up to? If it's 40 billion plus one, I mean, yes, it's service. But I think the philosophical question, just to get to, I mean, just 1 second. The philosophical question, which I think is the ultimate question for North-South Rail Link, even for the California
High-speed rail system.
high-speed rail system.
Yep.
It's the idea of if you build it, they will ride it.
Mm.
I mean, is what we're getting down to. I mean, it's the idea when, I've used this example in other discussions. 100 years ago, when they built the Brooklyn Bridge, there was constantly ferry traffic going back and forth across the East River from Brooklyn to Lower Manhattan. Because of the demand of people going back and forth from their jobs to their homes in Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn, they built the Brooklyn Bridge because of the demand. It was not a chicken or the egg, and you debated it. There was demand for it. Now, I think that same parallel applies today with something like the North-South Rail Link or the California LA to San Fran.
How about the Greenbush line? So
well,
Stephanie,
right. If
Stephanie
you
Pollock,
build it, they will
Stephanie
ride
Pollock
it.
has said she's not as big believer in if you build it, they'll come, because she says otherwise the Greenbush line would have many more riders and it doesn't. So it's not. She wasn't saying that you should not build anything, but she's saying that extensions don't automatically mean you'll get riders. Sometimes you don't, depending on what.
And it depends on the service. I mean, with all due respect to Stephanie, and she's a friend, the service we're providing to people on a commuter rail system is an absolute disgrace these days.
Well, what's the matter with it?
They can't keep 67 locomotives operating on a daily basis. Can you believe this?
Can't build enough coaches, that's right.
Can you believe this? Can't keep 67. Now, I think the mistake was in this privatization stuff. I think it was a huge mistake. Amtrak did a far better job than these private companies, and there were only two or three. Huh? Well, there were
before them, it was the Massachusetts Bay. There was
Jimmy O'Leary, the former general manager. He created a company for the purpose of doing this. But there are very few companies in the United States capable of providing passenger rail service.
We only had two bidders for the contract.
That's right.
We only had Keolis and the Massachusetts Bay
Right.
system. And what everybody said is that if you only have two people, you're not really getting competition.
Of course not. And Amtrak knows a lot more about how to run a passenger rail system than these guys. And they did a very fine job for us. We never had this constant problem. I mean, Amtrak, 96, 97, 98% on-time performance. I mean, we never had this stuff. Well, some genius decided that maybe it was time to privatize. And they put out an RFP.
You want to say who the genius was?
Well, it was at I can't remember who the governor was at the time or what was going on, but anyway. And
We'll put it in the show notes.
and they put out an RFP. Now, at that time, I was on the Amtrak board, and our CEO was a guy named David Gunn, who's the best rail and transit guy in America, native of Melrose, graduate of Harvard Business School, maybe the only graduate of Harvard Business School in 50 years that wanted to go to work on trains.
Although Brian Shortsleeve went to Didn't he go to Harvard?
Yeah, but he has had absolutely no experience running a train. I mean,
I mean, but it's not a bad comparison.
but Gunn is remarkable. Ran for the biggest.
Listeners, if you want to know how to run train systems, go to Harvard.
Huh? Not so, but Gunn really is remarkable. And he was my director of operations at the T under Bob Kiley, and subsequently ran Philadelphia, ran New York, ran Washington, ran Toronto. And when I got on the board and we need a new CEO, believe me, I said, don't make any search, let me make a phone call. And Gunn was the best CEO Amtrak ever had. But you know, you've got to have people who know what they're doing, and the situation with commuter rail here in Boston and Massachusetts is just a disgrace.
I have one more question on this, and then I know Ed has a few, but I think this goes back to the philosophical questions that we have. And you alluded to it. If we're in a bad situation with commuter rail service currently, and the MBTA is a mess, and there's report after report about abuse, corruption, outright theft, backlog of mismanagement, all these kinds of things. Shouldn't we take a beat and say, well, you know what, maybe we need to clean up the house and get the house in order prior to expanding, not running it in parallel, because then you're just embedding in that bad practices into the expansion itself, and that's going to hit us down the road with
Jeff, let me
major
say something to you.
taxpayer problems.
This is all about management. Now, when I was elected governor in '74, if you think the T has problems now, you should have been around '74.
I was minus 2 years old.
I'm not surprised. You're a young man.
I was a very concerned toddler.
Yeah.
It was an absolute basket case. We were running trolleys that had been built in 1942. Within 60 days, I had Bob Kiley on the job as the CEO. That was my first goal. We had to get somebody who was a skilled public manager. Kiley wasn't a transit guy, but he was a great public manager. Subsequently, he became a terrific transit manager. Went to New York, transformed that place. He was so good that the mayor of London brought him to London to straighten out the London Underground. When was the last time you heard of an American being brought to Europe to run a transit system?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And he was there for 4 years, did a great job. He said the only problem in London was he couldn't get a decent bagel. But other than that, it was okay. Who's the CEO of the T these days? There isn't one. Who's the director of planning and construction at the T these days? There isn't one. My director of planning and construction was a wonderful guy named Frank Kevel, Irish kid from Dorchester, civil engineering co-op student at Northeastern University where I teach. Co-opted at the T, went to work at the T. We made him the director of planning and construction. Frank Kevel did $3 billion worth of construction on the T in the 80s. That's the equivalent of what, 5 now.
Right.
On time, on budget, no fooling around. He did the red line extension. Who's the director of planning and construction at the T these days? There is not one. Now, the Baker administration has been in office for practically 2.5 years. There's still no CEO. Shortsleeve just stepped down, I understand. And there's no director of planning and construction. This is just terrible management.
But I'm going to go back to my original question, because you're talking about I'm a project manager by trade.
Okay,
that's what I do. I'm good at my job. But the idea of there's a stark difference between operations management and project management. So you outlined several $1 billion worth of projects that were completed on time, completed on budget. But from everything we've read in the news lately, there is a huge, huge problem with the operational built-in, call it management infrastructure, rules, lack of information, the lack of systems, lack of problems. I mean, we can say this, but we're getting to that point where it's going to, where the T pension is pulling back a lot of the revenue needed for maintenance, needed to address backlog. So what are some of the specific things beyond just maybe the head guy in charge or head woman in charge that can...
It's not complicated. It's not complicated. It needs a first-rate CEO. It needs a first-rate director of planning and construction. It needs a first team that knows what it's doing. It's 2.5 years into the Baker administration. We still don't have that. I don't understand this.
Ed, I'll let you go. Ed,
I just don't understand this.
So, when I was walking over here, and by the way, I took the MBTA to get to this interview. I would have anyway, but I thought it was just good optics for me to ride the Orange Line here. I used to live on the Orange Line up on...
I hope the ride was a satisfactory one.
But you know, it's funny. You talked about the fact that you think the T is worse than in the 70s now. So you're right. In the 70s, they were using 30-year-old trains from the 1940s, but we're now in 2017 using Orange Line trains from the 1960s. So actually, some of it is older than what you dealt with as governor your first term. But I asked that. So I was walking up here out of Ruggles, and I looked at the Southwest Corridor Park, and there's 85 acres of parkland up and down the Southwest Corridor. And I was thinking to myself, like, Governor Dukakis is the reason why this is here. I mean, I know you had help, obviously, but I meant that this is this huge, difficult, expensive project that cost $800 million that was being done during your second time as governor.
Right.
That has been, I can't even imagine this part of Boston without it being there. And it was very disruptive. Amtrak trains were moved, rapid transit was moved.
We took down the old creaky overhead trolley along Washington Street, and that area now has been transformed.
So I thought to myself, like, how has the politics of transportation changed from then to now? I would say that the politics is different. That I'm curious if you had to compare, like, the resistance to the Southwest Corridor project to doing, say, north-south rail link right now. How are the politics different? Kind of like not the individual people, but sort of the atmosphere. How does the public view transportation? How does the government view it? How is it different now advocating for the north-south rail link versus advocating for the Southwest Corridor thing 25, 30 years ago? What differences are there in politics?
I don't think fundamentally things have changed. It's still the same basic challenge. If you're the governor of this state, you try to surround yourself with top-notch people who in turn will go out and recruit top-notch people to do the job we expect of them, whether it's running the T or getting mothers on welfare to work, something we did by the thousands when I was governor, and for some reason isn't happening these days, or running a first-class public higher education system, which, Jess, you had an opportunity to be a part of.
Absolutely.
And I assume was a good experience.
Yes.
Who knows?
It's no Harvard, but
And that's fine. And as you both know, because you're in the private sector, 90% of it is people. Picking excellent people who know how to do the job and then go out and do it.
But isn't there need for money, for public support, for patience? I mean, it's not just people. I mean, I think, for instance, one of the reasons people thought we couldn't do the Olympics is because they said we just can't handle that. We can't even get the T to run on time. I think that Boston has sort of a kind of a confidence problem. I think that the big dig, which has begun when you were governor, that was 3 different projects when you were governor. It was the Central Artery, it was the Harbor Tunnel, it was the Seaport Access Road, with 3 things a part of it.
Supposed to have a north-south rail connector down the middle of it.
That's right.
What happened?
I don't know.
The Reagan administration did everything it could, first to stop the whole thing, and secondly to take the rail connection out of it. Absolutely stupid.
Why did it happen?
You better talk to the folks that, if they're still around, that surrounded that administration.
Did Ted Kennedy offend somebody? Was that what happened? I mean,
they were
you were there, so we're going to get to all the dirt at the end of the
They were
podcast.
kind of, you say, well, how come liberals are pro-rail? Lots of Republicans, lots of conservatives are pro-rail, let me tell you. But a lot of conservatives, for some reason, don't like trains, don't like transit. I don't understand it.
I think
there's a what a lot of liberals don't like trains, or
no, you said
well, I can tell you that the philosophical bent behind that is, and some of it is a bit tinfoil hat, but some of it's actual practicality, is that the idea of for 100 years now, since the advent of the automobile, there's been a desire for those who call themselves progressives or liberals to hate the car and what the car represents. I'm doing air quotes now. Independence, living where you want, going where you want. You just need the open road versus the train, centralized movement of people, control over people. Now, again, I'm talking about the cost-benefit analysis of it, but there is that philosophy that maybe, in the pages of who knows, National Review or Weekly Standard, you might get a tinge of that. But, I mean, when you talk about it practically, I think rail, when outside of highly centralized populations, isn't very practical. We have the trucking industry, moving most of our freight across the country, as opposed to 50, 100 years ago, much of it was rail. And it's much more efficient now, and as the engines become more fuel efficient, more clean, electric, robotic cars, we're going to see even more of that, and more production and lower cost of that. So there is, I think, a reflexive rejection of saying, why are you going to build a railway that you're going to have to maintain and do and create this huge bureaucracy and human infrastructure to go from LA to San Fran when you can just fly over it. And,
You can't,
and the market meets it.
Jeff,
So
you can't fly over it because the airports are running out of capacity. And at any event, trying to fly into San Francisco's fog on a regular basis. Look, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. The ideal trip for an airplane is $400 miles or more. It's a terribly inefficient way to fight your way to LAX. Have you ever tried to do that?
Yeah, I've been to LAX.
Have you?
Yeah.
Well, I lived there for 3 months and teach at UCLA. I live with this thing. It's brutal. A high-speed train that got you from LA to San Francisco in 3 hours, are you kidding me? It'll be loaded with people.
As opposed to a less than 90-minute flight.
No.
Drops you right
by the time you leave your house and you get to your destination, it's 4 hours. Because how long does it take you to...
I don't want to step on Ed's questions, but I look at it the same way I would look at when Bob Kraft wants taxpayer dollars to expand, put a stop at the Gillette station, and he wants taxpayers to do it. If it were, and I even said this when I was campaigning for Congress, if it's a wise investment somebody from the private sector would go, okay, I can make this work. And for the public sector to then take it over, it seems like it makes much less sense. If the public sector can't do it, if the private sector can't do it, there's got to be demand again for it. I don't want to beat a dead horse on this, but I think that's just what we get down to when we talk about
when we're in Los
discussions.
Angeles, we live in Westwood. At 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, it takes 15 minutes to get to LAX. Try it at 6 o'clock at night. And if you do it in less than an hour and a half, I'll applaud you. It's a disaster, don't you understand? Automobiles can't do the job. It's clear. They cannot deal with these kinds of transportation burdens. That's why you need high-speed rail. And air is no way to go 300 or 400 miles. It's just a very inefficient and very expensive way to travel 300 to 400 miles. Do we need high-speed rail? Of course we need high-speed rail. Why does the rest of the world understand this and we don't? I don't get it.
Well, they've had hundreds of years of centralized populations to grow over time to do it. It makes more sense in Europe.
They also have cultural support for it.
What's that?
Yeah, cultural support.
Yeah, it's a cultural difference. I mean, there's the idea that Americans want to drive cars and own cars.
I know, but unfortunately, at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon in metropolitan Boston, the congestion, the automobile congestion, is getting worse and worse and worse. What do you do about that?
It is terrible, honestly. I mean, I've lived here for 20 years.
I've done the commute home.
And I can't believe how bad. There are even traffic problems when it's not 5 o'clock in neighborhoods that never had traffic problems before. And I think it's really, that's kind of strange. But
there's a reason for that, but I'll get it.
One more question about the politics. So
yeah.
I understand that on paper that things like the North-South Rail Link, the Green Line Extension, South Coast Rail, these things are attractive. But it would seem like that the public just sort of isn't really behind them. Why is that? Why is it seem like the public is, even if the North-South Rail Link was free, I think the public might say, do you really want to go through this again, digging up downtown? I just think the public, especially reading about 2 years of MBTA scandals, I just think are they exhausted? Where do you think the resistance really is to this if it's such a good idea?
And all I can tell you is that I think it's fair to say that one of the more popular things I did as governor was modernize the T and turn it into what I think by 1990 was a pretty damn good public transportation system. Now, I can't speak for the administrations that followed. I'm not happy with the current service that we're getting. I think a lot of that, as I pointed out, is a lack of good management. And I still don't understand why we don't have a CEO, a director of planning construction, key positions filled 2.5 years into the Baker administration. I just don't get it. But we were running a pretty darn good public transportation system when I left office, and it didn't seem to be impossible to do so. And I have to tell you that getting some first-class managers to take over that system, and that's the responsibility of the governor. It's the governor who runs the T these days, and that includes commuter rail. And I think the privatization thing was a terrible mistake. But it wouldn't take much to reverse that. As it is, let me say one other thing. It's not that the T doesn't have money. They don't have the capacity to spend the money they have.
They've said that.
Yeah. And that's a direct result of what seems to me to be sheer incompetence.
Well, they claim they can't get enough qualified managers into the organization. They don't pay well enough, and that there isn't enough talent out there.
Trust me, there are plenty of people who you know and I know who could run that system and run it well.
Well, look, I mean, I've been doing management for a long time. I know that they're out there. It's just a question of attracting them and doing that. But
if a governor, let me tell you this, Jeff. If a governor goes to a really talented manager and says, "Look, I need you. I need you. Give me 5 years of your life to run the T," and I can, without naming them, I can name 4 people right now in the Boston metropolitan area who would be excellent CEOs of the T. You can get those folks. You can get those folks, but you got to go out and do it. I mean, when are we gonna get a CEO at the T?
So let me ask one more question about money. So where does the money come from for all this work? I think the T does have some money, but not enough to do the work they need to do. Not enough for the Green Line, not enough for South Coast Rail, not enough for the North-South Rail Link. One of the things that's different between when you were governor and now is back then it seemed like there was a lot more money for infrastructure, and it seems like now that the money is going to people and general welfare programs and healthcare, and it's not going into roads, bridges, regional transit agencies, or infrastructure. It seems like too much of our money is going to people and not infrastructure. Now, it's a big change from when you were governor. The budget, if you look at it, is like 1/4 Medicaid, and it's education. It's just where in your time there was a lot more money going into infrastructure than now, and that's sort of a sea change in how the budget is being viewed.
I don't think proportionally there's that much more. Now, I raised the gasoline tax 10 cents. Was the most popular thing I ever did. I can't imagine what we'd do without that dime.
True.
But when you think of it, gasoline prices vary so much. Look, I buy my gas at the Costco at Dedham. I'm paying $2.19. At one point, I was paying $1.75. Back in Brookline, it's $2.50. Why is it $2.50 at Brookline and $2.19 at Dedham at the Costco? I don't know. But I don't think if the people of this state thought that they would get their money's worth and significant improvements in their transportation system, I think they'd be willing to pay another nickel or dime.
That's I mean, we're getting into more philosophical
I have
stuff
one more
there,
question on
too.
this. I forgot.
Yeah.
So I have some friends in the state legislature, as Jeff does, and friends who live outside of Greater Boston. And they're always a little skeptical of putting more money into Boston projects when they don't have enough money for regional transit agencies, when their roads and bridges are crumbling. And they're sort of saying, you were once a state rep, what about transportation needs of the rest of the state? We can't just pour money endlessly into Boston if we don't get anything out here in, Pioneer Valley or somewhere else. And that could be a gas tax issue in terms of roads and bridges, but they also need money for RTAs. I mean, does your vision for transportation include these?
We always provided a significant portion of those increases for the regional transit authorities all over the state, always. Right now, Western Massachusetts needs a first-class modern rail connection to Boston.
Okay.
Their new state senator, Eric Lesser, has made this his top priority. Talk to the people out there. Why aren't they getting it? Connecticut is doing a major improvement on rail from New Haven to Springfield. Our piece of it is Springfield to Boston. What are we doing about it? Nothing.
Well, that's another huge project, though.
Yeah, these are.
It's not a huge project.
Well,
There's an existing rail line. It wouldn't take a great deal of money to rehab it and get it up to 125 miles an hour.
Okay.
It's there. You don't have to take a single house, a single business. It's just there. All you got to do is fix the tracks. Why aren't we doing that? You tell me.
Well, okay, I'll tell you. There's a few reasons for it, and some of the points I brought up earlier, but a lot of it we're moving each year after year. We're moving to a less infrastructure transportation-based society, especially for work. I mean, what we're talking about is day-to-day work, not necessarily leisure travel to and from the city. And within 15 to 20 years, we're going to have self-driving cars. We're going to have more computer, more analytics.
Jeff, but
directing.
can I stop you for a sec?
What?
Self-driving cars don't expand capacity.
They absolutely do.
How?
I mean, first of all, Ed alluded to it earlier. He said there's traffic now on roads that there never used to be traffic on. There are apps on people's phones now, like Waze, that direct you around where the congestion is. And in 20 to 30 years, you're going to see apps based on that type of technology directing self-driving cars, self-driving trucks that will find more efficient routes at 2 o'clock in the morning. And what I'm saying is the organic development of that is going to offset the potential
At
for
5
need
o'clock
for-
in the
for 2
afternoon,
billions.
at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, my friend, there's no app that's going to deal with 6-mile-an-hour traffic on the Southeast Expressway. There's
will-
got to be an alternative, and
if-
that alternative is rail.
If folks are working from home or working in offices that less centralized offices outside of Boston, outside of Manhattan, outside of San Francisco, and you see it taking place now, little by little. It's an evolution, not a revolution.
Well,
You're going to see. I'm just
there
saying.
there are other.
That's the cost-benefit analysis.
I mean, so 20, as you know, 20% of everybody in their car is by themselves in and out of Boston, which is very bad. And
20%?
I think is way more.
20% is people driving by themselves. I was reading this yesterday in terms of.
I would think it would be way more.
No, what was that figure?
I'd say about 80% of the auto traffic.
Yeah,
I
I'd flip it.
I
Yeah,
thought
most
it was
people
way
drive
low.
in by
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah,
And I thought it was way low.
yeah.
And I talked to some people during the Olympics thing about transportation because some of them were involved in the Olympics thing, and they were saying that they're really counting on that better car sharing and more people in cars and not driving by themselves could provide enormous gains in terms of capacity. They weren't saying don't do rail, of course. They're transportation nerds. They want to do everything. But they're saying that they do believe that a much better use of what we have would go a huge distance. The same reason the conservation is good for saving energy rather than building new power
Hey, I
plants.
know they're talking about congestion pricing and tolling all the highways. Try that out on the public, will you? And see how they react to
Oh,
this.
wait a second. Why would the public be? I mean, okay. Why would the public be
mean-
for a big digging up all of central Boston again versus having congestion
You're
pricing?
not going to dig up all of Boston. The new,
It's huge.
look, there's been no. Look, you guys are way behind the times. The new tunnel boring technology is revolutionary.
I saw the new one. Was in Seattle. They were using
It's
it.
pretty sick.
No.
They use
Amazing.
it in Europe. Yeah.
Los Angeles is using it. I saw it in action. I spent a morning. Los Angeles is building its version of the North-South Rail Link even as we speak. Los Angeles. And it's going to be completed in the next 2 years. Where's Boston? Why is Los Angeles doing this? Because you can't move in Los Angeles. I don't care whether you have autonomous vehicles, Jeff, or ride sharing, any of this kind of thing. It won't work. It doesn't work. And you guys understand this, don't you? Unless you want to double deck.
I don't know. I don't know what the
just
degree is.
I think the idea, what we've seen over the course of the past few decades, especially, it is a lot more efficient to manage smaller programs, smaller smaller units of activity than massive, stable legacy projects. That I mean, we have a difference. So this
No.
you made
It's,
an excellent case
it's
for
not
your
a difference
side.
of opinion. Development follows the infrastructure. Look at what's happened to Boston. Once we invested heavily in a good transit system, which is what happened in the 70s, 80s, what's happened to Boston? Boston has become a great city. Millennials don't want to be out there with their apps. They want to be in a city. They want to live here. They don't even want an automobile. They're not buying automobiles. They don't want to use them.
Well, when you live and work in a city, sure, but the working part of the city, we're a hub for technology, we're a hub for medical innovation, we have the best schools in the world.
Right.
I'd say that has a far outweighing impact, and it supports, again, the demand. If they build it, they will come. I go back to my Brooklyn Bridge example. You have the best schools in the world in Boston. We have the best technology in Boston. We rival San Fran and other technological hubs. Medicine. People come here from all over the world, but that drives it. It's a one-way street in my opinion. That goes not an if you build the infrastructure that supports it.
We got to get on with the politics,
right,
folks,
yeah,
because I
well,
got someone coming
we
in
got-
here in 10 minutes.
All
So
right.
let's get moving. And we'll come back
No
someday
problem.
and do it again.
No problem.
So I was going to say, so understanding what your priorities are, what is your advice to people looking at these projects you're doing? If they're getting resistance, what do you think is the answer to the politics here? You're somebody who's still very involved with transportation politics. You've heard even Stephanie Pollock expressing doubts about doing expansion versus fixing the system. Even she's sort of weighing all those things. And I want to say, if even Stephanie Pollock Secretary Pollock, of course, has concerns about doing more expansion, that means the politics have changed a little bit. So what do you think is the answer to the difficulty of politics in creating new transportation infrastructure?
I don't know what the answer is. I think it's clear we have certain priorities. One of them is running a first-class public transportation system, which today we're not doing. And secondly is doing selective expansions that make sense. And there are only a few of them, to tell you the truth. Now, managing well, making sure that we're using modern train technology, which is exploding, by the way, all over the world, and we don't even know about it.
Replacing all the old signals we have.
I mean, there's a new train in Europe that runs on hydrogen. Doesn't require any infrastructure, any catenaries, any of this kind of stuff. It's relevant. It's in operation. We don't even know it exists. We're so far behind. So we got to get on with it.
And you also said you wanted more people at top level in transportation in Massachusetts. You want the governor to the point.
We need excellent people. We need a CEO at the T. Doesn't have one. It's been 2.5 years. This is ridiculous.
All right, we'll bring that up
Okay.
at our next meeting.
Politics.
With the big guy. Now, I want to kick it off with, we're going to shift topics completely.
We only have about 6-7 minutes, so we'll have
Oh
to go
boy,
fast.
we'll have to do potpourri.
Yeah,
here.
got to move quickly.
I want to ask you personally, since you ran for president, have your ideological politics shifted in any direction? Do you still see yourself, not necessarily issue to issue, have you become more quote-unquote liberal in some areas, conservative in others? What have you seen in your party, in the Republican Party? What's changed since you ran for the White House?
Jeff, I'll tell you, what's changed is that folks we used to call liberal or moderate Republicans, with whom I worked in this state, and really terrific people, who kind of, we shared the same values. Maybe we...
Like Frank Sargent.
Yeah, Sargent for one, and others, Elliot Richardson for another. Frank Hatch, I didn't know what a wetland was until Frank Hatch explained it to me. He was a great environmental leader at a time when nobody knew anything about environmental stuff. They virtually left the Republican Party. And instead, we've got an increasingly narrow ideological Republican Party with whom guys like me find it very difficult to work.
So you say it's just a one-sided
No, I'm not saying that. We Democrats have our lefties as well.
Right.
And that's always been an issue within the parties.
But has that changed over time? 'Cause I remember I've watched both parties my whole life, and I do think that both parties are different than they were. My father-in-law, for instance, is a JFK Democrat. He liked you a lot. I mean, he knows you're still alive, of course. I don't mean that. But I meant that he lives in Maine. But, like, he, doesn't view the party the way he did 25 years ago. He says, the party's changed, but I've stayed the same. He's still a reasonable, pragmatic man.
Yep.
And he wonders
Yep.
whether the party of JFK would welcome JFK today. And one of our previous guests in the podcast was saying, I don't know about that, the Democrats have narrowed to a bit, and there's people that feel, kind of homeless compared to what they're seeing on television and all that.
I don't disagree with that. And one of the challenges for my party is to make sure we've got a good-sized tent that could bring people in, and we've got a God-given opportunity to do that thanks to this guy in the White House. And if we don't take advantage of this, stop this red-blue stuff, stop dismissing half the country before you even begin, and start running 50-state, 185,000 precinct campaigns. And I'm serious about this, which is entirely possible. There's no reason under the sun why the Democratic Party can't do that. We'll start winning elections again. Now, look, Hillary won this thing by 3 million. We got this crazy electoral college system, which should have been abolished a couple of hundred years ago.
Oh, no.
Which is still...
that's episode 2 when we come back.
We'll come back to that. I mean, there's nothing dumber than the electoral college system. It makes absolutely no sense at all these days.
I love it.
Well, you may love it. I guess that's why you're Republican. But it's crazy. I mean, to have somebody win an election by 3 million votes...
I liked it a lot until about 6 months ago.
Yeah. But, I mean, the Republicans have got plenty of problems. And they're going to have more as we see this administration stumble around. But that doesn't mean the Democratic Party doesn't have work to do. And we do.
Do you think it can get past this, it seems, ingrained the identity politics that just keep coming
I
up.
certainly hope so.
Yeah.
And
Because,
a
I
lot
mean,
of us. Jeff, no, I agree
yeah.
with you. I think we've got to be a broad-based party. We've got to go back out in the street. We need 185. I'm serious about this. 185,000 precinct captains organizing at the grassroots, and that's entirely possible. I mean, look, I carried West Virginia by 12 points. How come it's red? I carried Iowa by 10. It's trending red. What is this? But I think a lot of it has to do with this notion that somehow there are red states, there are blue states, that never the twain will meet, and that kind of stuff. I just reject that. I think the folks I campaigned with in places like West Virginia and Iowa were good people, solid, middle-class folks, had good values, and they were nice to me, but
But the country's changed since then. The
well,
polarization data is extreme. I mean, I know I think as a Republican, for instance, living in Massachusetts, even though I'm very moderate, that there are places in the state where the cultural feelings, that the culture around politics is such, they wouldn't listen to me no matter how reasonable I was. The polarization is on, I'm not saying it's equal, it isn't, in my opinion. But it's bad on both sides. If I went out to Northampton and said, hi, I'm Republican, they would strangle me. Right?
Let me tell you that this is the purpose of this podcast, is to have normal civil conversations about issues, dive deep into it,
and
more
power to you. But look, when I was a kid, Brookline was 5-1 Republican. If you were a Democrat, you were.
Wow.
No, I'm
Can
serious.
I go back in time and live there instead of when I lived there?
Newton was 8-1 Republican.
Wow.
I mean, a Democrat didn't have a prayer. It wasn't until the 50s, early 60s, when a bunch of us started getting involved, and the town itself changed, that Brookline moved at least into the independent column. Now, you know, we're, 8-10-1 Democratic. Don't ask me how that happened or why it happened. But, this is an evolving thing. All I'm saying is that from the standpoint of my party, we've got work to do. We got to stop this identity politics stuff,
I think that would be
Jeff, and
we
we got to get out there and connecting with people, all people, most of whom I would argue tend to support the kinds of issues that Democrats are for. If you go out and take a poll tomorrow and ask the American people, should working Americans and their families have decent, affordable health care, what do you think the numbers look like?
Well, I would doubt that it would be much less than 90%.
93.
Yeah.
93.
And what are the 7% thinking? It's a pretty,
They haven't thought about it.
pretty anodyne question.
No, they haven't thought about it.
That's like, do you like ice cream and puppy
No,
dogs?
but it's interesting,
sure.
isn't it? Right?
But yeah,
And it's not that you're asking them a phony question, because obviously you want to know whether or not they think that that's the case. Why is Medicare so popular? It's compulsory. It's mandatory.
I wouldn't argue that's why it's popular.
Huh?
It's
No,
popular
but
because
it's
it's covered in
can
it hides
count
the
on it.
cost.
Because
Yeah, you can count on
it provides comprehensive benefits to millions of people who I think most Americans think are deserving. They're seniors, they've worked hard, this, that, and the other thing. And 85% of the uninsured people in this country are working. They're not sitting around, they're not loafing, they're not on public assistance. If you're on welfare in this country, you get Medicaid. These are working folks. I don't think we did a very good job of helping people to understand that we're talking about working Americans and their families. And I think it's one of the reasons why the Affordable Care Act wasn't as popular then as it is now. Now that people are really starting to understand this, it's pretty clear what's going on. But these are fundamental issues. People want good schools for their kids. They want decent health care. They want jobs that pay reasonably well. I mean, these are not complicated issues.
Do you want to
I
finish the Buckley story?
I have one question. It's kind of a yes or no.
Shoot.
You may have answered it in the past. I
okay.
apologize if so. We don't have to get too far into it. But 1990, if you were elected president, would you have gone into Kuwait?
1988?
No, I mean the invasion of Saddam Hussein into Kuwait, the Gulf War.
The Bush administration.
I'm just asking.
You know the facts, don't you? The Bush administration practically invited him to do so. You know that.
Invited Saddam?
Yeah, because our ambassador, on instructions of the State Department, went in to see him and said the United States has no security interest in Kuwait, quote unquote, and then she went on vacation.
Well, I don't know if that's an invitation, but I say
well,
major
2 weeks,
military- but
2 weeks later, he invaded.
What But what would do you have any, or you don't know it necessarily? Would you handle it differently, or is that just too involved?
I wouldn't
hypothetical?
have been supporting Saddam, which is what we did.
So you would have. So you think it was a precursor to that?
Yeah, no
that was
question
your-
about it. No question about it. We were playing games with Saddam, weren't we?
Oh, well, yeah, we
We're
wanted
supporting
against the
him
Iranians.
To
We're
try to
supporting him against the
block
Iranians.
Iranian expansion or whatever it was. I mean, it's crazy.
All right.
It's crazy.
That was my last question. So why don't we
Okay.
wrap it? Tell us about
Buckley
that
story
Bill
to end it
Buckley
up.
story, and we'll wrap up this episode.
No,
of
no,
the
no. It was no big
podcast.
story. One of the early debates, it was in June or July of '87, when 7 of us were first getting together, was in Texas. And Buckley was moderating with the help of Bob Strauss. And, the question at that point, when you're running with 6 other candidates, is, is there some way you can distinguish yourself? And at least leave some decent memories in people's minds. So I decided I'd get into an argument with Buckley over what we were doing in Nicaragua. And it was kind of fun. And it worked.
That was a big,
That's all I can say.
story back then.
But
You
let
did
me,
win the nomination.
but just
so
let
you
me
did
let me
something
say
right.
this year, I had a lot of respect for Buckley. I liked him. I thought he was provocative. I thought he was obviously a very bright guy. Right. And I thought I didn't agree with him, but I thought he was a guy that made a major contribution to the political dialogue.
Did he make the politicians of your era better at what they had to do?
I think it made us think hard about what he was talking about what we thought, what we believed in, and he's kind of a delightful guy in his own way. Didn't agree with him, but he kind of made it fun.
Are there any Bill Buckleys today? Before we end
I
up?
don't know, Ed.
No
You
one
tell
comes to
me.
mind?
I don't see a lot of them. Everybody's so serious. Nobody has a sense of humor. I mean, it's all And look,
Everybody's taking themselves too seriously, huh?
and let me tell you something. There's a lot of fun in politics. There really is.
We know that.
I mean, if you talk to the people that work for me at the State House, they'll tell you that in many ways it was not only the best job they ever had, it was a fun job. I mean, we loved what we were doing, and we thought we were doing some pretty good things. Humor is kind of important, and I'm not sure collectively we've got the sense of humor we ought to have in this country. It's all so serious, and it's all so this, that, the
Win
other
at all
thing.
costs and everything.
Huh?
Oh.
Oh yeah, and it's I don't know that it's nastier. I mean, if you want nasty politics, go back to 1789 and 90 and 91 and 92. I mean, things were tough.
They're pretty nasty now.
They're pretty nasty now, but it's a lot of fun. I wouldn't swap my life for anything, with one exception. I'm sorry I didn't go to the White House, but other than that, and I'm still at it, and so's Kitty, and we're still having a lot of fun, and I hope helping to make this a better place. And my thanks to you for doing what you're doing, because this kind of dialogue is an important part of what goes on, and we have much too little of this kind of dialogue these
Well,
days.
that's what we strive to do here on the Lincoln Review podcast.
Thank you.
Governor Michael Dukakis, thank you so much for joining us today. We'd like to remind our audience to subscribe to us on iTunes, subscribe to us on SoundCloud, subscribe to us on YouTube. Please share this with your friends via social media. We are always looking for new and interesting conversations, deep dives into issues. Thank you so much again. We really appreciate the conversation, and we hope to see you again soon.
I hope so.
Thank you. I'm going to hop on the MBTA right now.
Take care.
Then maybe we'll meet to clean up some neighborhoods.
Yeah,
That's an inside joke.
You have to edit that out, actually.
All right. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, fellas.
Bye-bye.